Hello, everybody. Welcome to another episode of the Thriving Adoptees podcast. Today, I'm delighted to be joined by Christelle, and I'm very concerned about getting her surname right. Let's see how I do here. Christelle Pellecuer.
Yes.
Close enough?
Yes.
Close enough.
Very good.
Yeah. So I did French at school for like 8 years, a ridiculous amount of time, but we did very little pronunciation. It was mainly writing down stupid words that you would never use, and very little conversation. And as such, that my spoken French is terrible. So get my apology in for that. So Christelle, this is a first. So you were born in Madagascar, right?
Yes, that's correct.
Madagascar, and so that's a first, right? We've never had an adoptee on the show from that was born in Madagascar. Christelle's a transracial adoptee, and you were adopted by a French couple.
Yes.
Yeah. And raised in France, but you've also spent a lot of time in the UK as well, yeah?
Yes, that's correct.
Cool. And normally, I shared this with Christelle before I hit the record button. Normally, I have loads and loads of notes from my initial conversations, but we must have talked about stuff that was so great that I didn't feel I needed to write notes down for it. What we got to at the end was an agreement for a title for our conversations at the end to kind of kick us off, of spirituality and adoption. And the first thing that strikes me is that we hear a lot about the psychology of adoption, but we don't hear a lot about spirituality in adoption. And yet, in my experience, it's a more powerful place for healing. And I'm struggling with my words here. I think we're talking about psychology and spirituality, and yet all the focus in the adoption land seems to be about psychology. It's about counseling. It's about the primal wound. It's about trauma. And that seems to me all kind of sitting within more of a psychological space than a spiritual space. What's your take on all that?
Well, thank you for having me, first of all. Yeah, I mean, it's for me, I see everything a bit holistic, to be honest. I think all of those conversations should be coming together. Yeah. And we shouldn't really just have them in isolation. I think for me, the spiritual side have definitely helped my journey into becoming who I am today. Not just, therapy has been very important, but also doing meditation, doing a lot of spiritual, other modalities of spirituality into my journey has helped me. But also, I feel adoption is, as we all know, it's a trauma. And for me to get through that trauma, I had to reach out to my, I don't know, what we would call spirituality, I suppose, because we don't, in the West, we've got the definition of spirituality. I grew up in Madagascar, where my grandparents actually were, the way they were living was spirituality was every day around them. So in a sense, like Western medicine, I didn't really know Western medicine until I was adopted in France. If I had an illness or something, it's either we have herbal medicine, or we will connect with the spirit of the ancestors, and So all that thing I don't think we talk very openly in the West, or it's not in the common conversation. I think for me that has been important to reconnect to my own past and use that spiritual journey to get there. And I also see part of, because I keep asking, I am a kind of person who asks a lot of questions to myself. So a lot of the questioning that I had, why was I adopted in the West? Why was I adopted by a white French family in the West when Madagascar was colonized by the French? So all this thing to me didn't really make sense. But it got to a point for me to be able to understand it. I had to reach out to my spirituality and actually realize that there's another dimension of why the reason my purpose in this life was. It's not an easy journey. The adoption has not been an easy journey, but I had to go through that trauma, through that adoption journey. So I can then today find a purpose and support other adoptees to navigate that space. So for me, it's more of a spiritual journey in itself. And that's the way I kind of reconciled with my own adoption journey.
Yeah. So what really touched me when we spoke last time is you talked about a spiritual connection to your birth mother.
Mm-hmm.
Can you tell us a little bit more about that?
Yeah, so my mother passed away when I was 10. So I didn't really have that much time with her, but enough to have a connection with her. But as during my whole journey of adoption, I suppose, I always have felt that connection, that she was around. And this sounds a little bit woo to hear, but I've always felt like a presence around me as I was growing up and I don't quite know how to explain this into words, into words really.
That's okay. That's okay.
But I've always felt, if I have like difficulty, for example, and I would feel that presence, that she was still there in spirit, even if she wasn't there physically for me. So I had that feeling, and and like I say, for me, because I grew up in Madagascar and surrounded by that type of upbringing, it was a part of a way of life over there. So for me, that spiritual connection and that energetic connection with other people who are not into this realm in the human form still exists, even though I'm not in that surrounding anymore. So I've always felt that presence, that kind of protection in a way, that she's not there physically, but she's looking out for me on my own journey. And I've always felt that.
So that you preempted my next question, which was going to be what was the feeling, or what the feelings that felt connection gives you, and it's one of, you said it's one of protection. I don't think we can go too woo woo on this, right? So the reason that what you said about the connection made such sense to me is I felt a connection with my birth mum kind of once. And it was huge and profound, and I really didn't know what it was at the time. And it is very hard to put into words. For people that are thinking that this is that is too far off, maybe I can use one of your words, Christelle, to explain it to the listeners, right? So the word Christelle used was energetic. And if we go into a room with lots of other people in it, we get a sense of the energy. in that room. So, for example, if that room is full of if that room is full of people who are mourning a loss of somebody, then there's going to be one level of energy. If that room is full of people that are celebrating a wedding of a couple, that's going to have a completely different energy. And that's kind of that's a palpable sense that we've all had, and it's a sense of the energy that we feel in everyday life. When I felt my as I look back on something that happened 7 or 8 years ago now, and I felt I felt connected with my birth mother. I felt it was like the merging of me and her. So it was more of a merger than a connection. It wasn't like two people holding hands. It was like two ends of a swimming pool merging into one. So I use this metaphor every now and again. I go to a swimming pool around Christmas. It's a big 50-meter, 60-yard pool. There is a wall that comes from the base of the swimming pool to divide one big swimming pool into two little ones. And the connection that I felt, the merger that I felt with my birth mother was like when the wall comes down between those two swimming pools, and what were two become one. It's a merger rather than a connection, but you could call it a connection as well. And for me, that space was an incredibly healing, a very healing space, very healing space. So this, and it is hard to put into words, and that's the challenge, right? So the Western world is obsessed with words, and we are talking less about energy and about connection and oneness. And the bit that the quote that I always come back to around this is this quote that from a French philosopher, I think, says we're not spiritual beings having a human experience. Sorry, we're not human beings having a spiritual experience. We're one spiritual being having 7 billion, whatever it is, 8 billion human experiences. We are all one, and we are connected. We are in that space of warmth and oneness. That's our identity, and our trauma but our trauma separates us. On one level, we can look at trauma as separating us from the rest of the world.
Yeah, I think you've explained it very well. And I mean, we tend to say, we go to places and sometimes we say, oh, that was a good vibe. So this is kind of the thing that we feel, we felt something that was really good that made us feel good, but it's not something we can tangibly say what it is. And I think that is a challenge in a way in the Western world, is because we have to see to believe. We expect to see something tangible to be able to believe. But yeah, we actually don't doubt when we are being able to breathe. We don't see the air that we're breathing every day, but we actually believe that we're going to be waking up every day and breathe the air. But when it comes to other things, we expect to see something tangible to be able to believe it. And I think that's a bit of the challenges with it all. Whereas I think in some other community around the world, there are more ways to believe that even if there's something you can't see, it doesn't mean that it doesn't exist. And I think that's what we're talking about. You know, sometimes there is things around that we can't see, but they actually exist. And I mean, for my case, one specific example that I always feel is one day I was driving, and I don't know, I nearly got hit by a car, but for some reason, my car just pulled on the side, and there was no. I know I didn't do that. I I know there was another force that was supporting me in that moment, because I even say when I got to the side of the road, whoa, what's happened? How did this happen? Because that was the first thing I said. And for me, I always believe that, you know, my mother was there supporting me in spirit and helping protecting me that day. Otherwise, I would not be here on that occasion. So it's yeah, I think it's for me, I believe it, like, you know, it's like the air I breathe every day. I don't see it, but I believe it's there. So when things like that happen, I just say, there is things happening. I can't see it, but I know. There's a knowing. I think it's a knowing inside you that say, this is what it is, and you just go with it.
Yeah. So it's more, it's a knowing rather than knowledge. It's not a concept. It's not a theory. It's not like knowledge that you can write down in a book. It's a knowing. It's at a deeper level, a more essential to you.
Well, yeah, it is a knowing inside. I don't, I mean, in a way it's a bit like knowledge, but I would say it's just something you can't see physically.
Yeah.
But you know it's there.
Yeah. So
and I think people I don't know, have had conversation with a friend who cannot see. And I think they're more understanding of this concept because they actually have to learn about trusting what is around them because they don't see. So when I was talking to them, it was easier for them to understand this kind of concept because they rely on their senses in a way. And yeah, so it's an interesting concept that how the environment where we've been raised that we have to see to believe that something exists is, I think it doesn't help us always in trusting ourselves. And actually, and this is another issue, like around, I mean, one of the struggle I had as an adoptee is trusting myself all these years, because I have the knowing, I get all these intuitions, but I didn't trust it because, oh, it was just something from inside me that I couldn't see. So I never really trusted it. And it's that knowing was trying to guide me into a direction, but I wasn't trusting it because I didn't see, oh, this is not something I can believe because I can't see it. So that has led me into making the wrong decision sometime in life. But if I did trust that thing that I could feel and know, but I didn't see, that might have taken me into a different direction and helped me stay away from some of the issues I've had in life.
Yeah. Yeah. It's like deep knowing, wisdom, intuition, those sort of right brain things rather than left brain logic stuff. Because the left brain's the language center, isn't it? Both parts of the brain do language, but left left brain is where all the language,
the logical side, and and the right brain, we are more creative. So all the creativity, like creativity is something you cannot see, but it's just, I mean, the end result you can see, but the process of creativity can be not seen as well.
Yeah. And I think that's why a lot of people talk about, a lot of people that come on the podcast have written a book, or written a memoir, and they found that incredibly therapeutic, because that's allowed them to take stuff, to get stuff out of themselves and onto paper. It's made what was subconscious conscious. They've seen it, and they have been spending time in that creative
space,
right hand brain, right hand space, to get that out. And people talk, so that's why memoirs are so therapeutic. And people also do this, perhaps lesser known, but artists as well, creating pictures, or poets, right? What poems allow us to do is to go into that metaphorical space, and we're no longer tied by the need to have something that makes logical sense. So instead of something that is descriptive, like a piece of non-fiction, should we say, or a piece of non-fiction, a description of what's happened, we can actually evoke a feeling, evoke a healing feeling, evoke that feeling of trauma, put that into metaphors. So, like this idea that we are coming out of the fog. The fog reveals the dark clouds of trauma, the storm clouds of trauma that were subconscious. We hadn't felt them. Maybe we felt them. We hadn't seen them. We hadn't understood them. Coming out of the fog allows us to see the dark clouds of trauma, and using this right brain metaphorical kind of approach, we can take the abstract and make it concrete, so we're better able to maybe process something that has before it's only lived as in our bodies as a feeling, or in our head as thoughts, and we're getting it out of that system and onto some paper.
Yeah, Hannah, I mean, I do writing, and that is again another thing. Sometimes the best writing I think I've done is when I don't think about what I'm writing. I'm allowing myself to almost be like a channel. It's sometimes it just starts putting the pen to the paper, and then things just flow out of you without even knowing where this is coming from. And I mean, I try to practice that doing journaling regularly, by not thinking about what I'm going to write. I might have a prompt, but then things just come out of me without really knowing where it's coming out, because I'm not thinking, oh, this is what I'm going to write. So that's again in itself, and I think a lot of artists do this, where they're channeling something for them, and that creativity is just coming out of them. And I suppose that's what some people call a gift. They're giving a gift, and they are passing it to other people. So I think, again, that is not something it's easy to explain in words. It's just coming out of you.
Yeah. So it's almost as if that little the little ego self that thinks it's in control, and who we identify with is tiny compared to the bigger subconscious wisdom and knowing of us. Is that what you kind of getting at?
Yeah, I mean, that is part of it. I think once we don't allow our ego being in place, our potential is huge. And I don't think most humans tap into their own potential because we've got that ego. And that ego is, I mean, I see it as a way of protecting us sometimes, especially, like us adoptees who've gone through trauma. Our ego then have even a lot more to hold on to because have so much more to remember that we've gone through. So trying to protect us and trying to hold on to things that really we should let go over the time. So we've got more difficulty to tap into that knowing and into that, to channel from that subconscious part of us.
Yeah.
So I definitely think it is a much bigger part of us that we don't always have the chance to tap into.
Is the trauma in the ego?
No, I don't think the trauma is in the ego. I think the ego is just a tool that we are using to protect ourselves. So I think the ego is just one part of us. And if let's say we've been through a situation where maybe it wasn't good for us, then every time we might enter into another situation, similar situation, then the ego step in, that part of us step in to try to stop us to behave in a different way, just because we want to protect us so we don't get hurt again. But I do feel it's definitely a part of us. I think we are made of different parts. And that part that you're saying, the knowing, who has all the knowing or who's able to channel, is one part. Our physical being is another part. Our ego is another part. Yeah, so it's just one part that contributes to the whole.
Yeah, as I asked that question, I was thinking, is the ego made of trauma? And who knows, right? But seems that place, if you, that wiser part of you, that bigger part of us, that bit that's connected with one. I don't know. I think I'm going to have to give some more thought on that, or wait for a download.
Yeah.
No, I'm going against my knowing here. I'm feeling to me that it's the ego that's been wounded. It's the ego that is the trauma. It's the ego that's the trauma response.
Yeah, no, definitely the trauma response. I think I agree with that, but it's not the trauma itself. Yeah, it's just a response to it. The ego is responding to that trauma.
Yeah, fascinating.
Yeah.
I guess when I normally get around to this when I go into this space, I will think about spirit as our essence, and that spirit is untouched by the trauma. It's the bit that's that's unwounded. It's the closest. I've been talking about this recently on a couple of other podcasts. If we say there's a spiritual identity and a psychological identity, the spiritual identity is whole. The psychological identity is the bit that's wounded. That's healing. And the continuation of that, I would see as our spiritual identity being the essence of who we are. And my metaphor for that is the diamond of the Thriving Adoptees logo, and the trauma is the clenched fist that holds and hides the diamond. So it's the outer layer.
Yeah.
And therefore, if we're looking for our true identity, we are saying we are not our trauma. We are the spirit that's hidden by that trauma. So it's a seeing thing rather than a seeing thing. On one level, it's a seeing thing, and on another level, it's a knowing thing. To use your knowing, somebody else expressed that. Yeah. So seeing, we see a glimmer. We see a glimmer of hope in the essence of our unwounded self. But it's just a glimmer. It's just a sight. And then as we continue the journey, we see more and more of the diamond, and then at some point we feel our brilliance and we know our essence.
Yeah, that's a very good way to explain it. So does that mean that are we able to let go of our ego completely? Is that,
well,
I mean,
it's always there to remind us, isn't it? There's a song there.
Yeah. And I mean, maybe because that journey is such a long journey to get towards of having this diamond open completely in the open. Maybe we can't completely let go of that ego, but slowly it's letting go of that diamond, and slowly it's got less hold of it.
There's less urgency to heal psychologically when we see that spiritually we are whole.
Yeah.
So we're less hung up. In the West, we've become emotophobic. You know, I had a realization in the podcast I recorded earlier today. I've been shaming my emotions. I've been worried about being worried. So I've been trying to deny the truth of how I felt. I've tried to suppress stuff, and this is why there's so many. This is why we numb. You know, we as adoptees we try to numb, suppress. We're scared of our feelings. One of the greatest explanations I've heard of this was from on another episode of the podcast with an adoptee called Pamela Karanova, who she had she describes a long relationship with alcohol, and the alcohol was her defense mechanism against her feelings. When she realized that she didn't need to defend herself against her own feelings, that's when the relationship with alcohol ended. Mm-hmm. We feel like we feel this. We see that coming out of the fog. We see those dark clouds of trauma, and we know we're going to get drenched. We know how much water, we know how much rain is going to come out of those storm clouds. Maybe we're worried about lightning strikes and thunder, and all this stuff is coming in, and we're scared of that storm.
Yeah, because also, I guess, our body, remember, and that's why I say at the beginning, it's also connected, you know, the spiritual part, our body, our psychology, it's all connected. We can't really just deal with one part without looking at the other part, because our body remembers all our trauma. Our brain remembers our trauma. So even if you deal with the spiritual part, we still have to deal how all that is connected to the other part of our being. So I think this is where I think we need to have an holistic approach, and also we cannot just deal with the physical side without having to think of the spiritual side. So for me, the way I've dealt with how a journey for my life is having to handle a lot of those different sides of my body. I have to do as much work with my body, and actually with my body, that is one of the hardest part for me, is to connect with my own body, because I tend to keep all the emotions, and like you say, suppressing the emotions, so they all go in my body, and that trauma stay there. So I had to do a lot of work around movement, for example, to try to get rid of those heaviness in my body. But then to try to get to that diamond you talk about, I had to do some spiritual practice to practice the knowing, and to develop that side of me, and then have to deal with therapy and other things with my psychology. So I think I've always used different modality to deal with the different part of me.
Yeah. I thank you for that, you know, because I can thank you for the reminder on the holistic element of it, because I think I can be a little bit too narrow in my view, you know. I guess, you know, one of the challenges is, you know, we're having a conversation, so to what extent can we can touch some space, we can touch a healing space, and yet we're not doing body work or a therapy session at all. It's a conversation, and that,
yeah,
we have words of all we've got.
Yeah, no, absolutely. I was going to say, I think this is why sometimes the journey takes longer, because I think a lot of us started by just taking one area of our life. And I think most of us have been told go to therapy first. But then the journey is longer because we haven't really touched to the other side of the journey. And I feel, for me personally, I would have, like someone told me early on in my journey, like in my teens, for example, do a lot of work around body, so a lot of embodiment, because that's where I was really stuck. I think that's where and even today, I still have some residue left of trauma in my body. I don't know if you know the book called The Body Keeps a Score. Yeah, and that's really explained it very well. And when I read that, I was like, whoa, okay, yeah, I understand why I need to do a lot more movement, and why. But yeah, I would have liked those kind of teaching to come into my teenagehood, for example, so I could do a lot. I would have got rid of a lot more of what I was keeping in my body, because that's how I was coping. That was my coping mechanism, to try to suppress all the emotions in my body.
Yeah.
But I didn't realize it until very late,
Yeah.
later on in my adult life. And that's why now I'm able to say, okay, I have to do it in a holistic way, not just one way. And it's a journey of learning, I suppose. But yeah.
We've had some therapists on the show who've said, you know, there's a fundamental problem with talk therapy. It requires words.
Yeah.
And if relinquishment trauma is at birth, it's before words. So how can you, a verbal solution or a verbal modality isn't going to work with a pre-verbal trauma. And that's like, that hit me so hard. Like, what are we doing? You know, the body work that you're talking about, the modalities that we should be looking at should go somewhere where they shouldn't. We shouldn't be trying to, I don't know, use a screwdriver to dig a hole. You know, we need a pickaxe. We need a pickaxe to dig a hole, not a screwdriver.
Yeah.
We've been using the wrong tools. You know, the therapy is the wrong tool. It's the wrong modality. But, you know, so I started doing some therapy recently, and you know, as a client, I mean, I'm not a therapist in any sense of the word. And we're doing body work. There's not a lot of, there is a bit of talk, but there's very little. It's about body work. It's about feeling the feelings that are trapped, you know.
Yeah.
And I came to a realization off the back of it is that anger's my safety valve. Stuff bottles up, and then
explodes.
It blows up.
Yeah, I mean, I was adopted quite old. I was 10 years old, and I had all the language. But for me, again, language was very difficult, because I went from speaking Malagasy for 10 years to having to conform and speak English, French. And also because before I was adopted, I was left at the Catholic missionary in the village where I lived. And already from that moment I stepped there, I was told I couldn't speak my own language. So that in itself was a trauma. So I then decided I didn't want to talk at all, because if I couldn't speak my own language, I didn't want to talk. So I had difficulty I didn't want to speak to anybody for a long time. So even when I started learning French and go to France, I didn't feel safe speaking. So when my parents first wanted me to go into talking therapy, it didn't work for me, because I was sat in those therapy sessions and I was mute. I couldn't get any word out, because I was, my coping mechanism was just to not say nothing. I couldn't speak. So even at that age, talking therapy didn't work for me. I didn't have the language. Well, it was my coping mechanism was not to speak anyway. So it's sometimes it doesn't always work, talking therapy.
Wow. Do you remember when there was a shift in that? Because you're talking now, right?
Yeah. No, eventually, I think because I think somewhere in me, I realized that I wasn't never going to go back to Madagascar. So I had it to conform to the life that I was given. And I think I've always been more creative in that sense. So I was, as growing up, I was doing a lot of drawing, and I always liked dance. So I think that was the way I was expressing myself. But in terms of communicating with my family, I had to speak French. But I suppose, yeah, and when I think about it now, I've never used French as a creative tools to express myself. It's always been other platform like dance and writing, drawing, I suppose. So yeah, I've never thought it that way, but in a way it makes sense that then I use French as a way of communicating to people, but not expressing myself. Yeah, in a deeper level, I suppose.
Yeah. I was thinking about dance, and dance and music go hand in hand, don't they? And the power, the energy of music. And yeah, have you ever got into any kinesiology? Do you know what I mean?
I did, yeah, I did some kinesiology, and I was also gonna say this is why in African country dance is a spiritual practice. It's we see it just as a, I don't know, maybe just hard in the Western world, but I know that in the place I grew up, dance was part of rituals and part of ceremonies, and it was part of everyday life almost. I mean, it wasn't almost, it was part of everyday life. So I think that's also another thing was really hard for me. It's all those practice, those normal things that I used to do up to 10 years old was being treated very differently in the Western world. So dance was one thing that's really struck to me, because I know that I wanted to do dance every day when I was arriving in France, but there was not that opportunity like the way I was practicing it in my country. So, just how we take those little practices is very different in those two sides of the world.
Yeah. I guess I should have told everybody or asked you because Madagascar is off the east coast of Africa, right?
Yes.
So which obviously Africa's a huge continent. I don't know, probably 3,000 miles long or something, big like that. Which country is it opposite? Which country is Madagascar?
Well, the closest country to it is Mozambique. So it's kind of around Mozambique and South Africa. So it's in that corner of the world.
It's towards the south of.
Yes. It's that island that is you always see on the map at the bottom of Africa.
Sorry, listeners, I should have filled you in on that earlier in case you're wondering where Mozambique and the Mozambique African connection.
It's eastern southern Africa.
Yeah. So it's what we're talking about here is the difference between the Western take on life and the rise of science and materialism versus what other people call like indigenous cultures. So that could be African cultures, that could be Indian cultures, that could be South American cultures, those sorts of cultures where that are so different from.
Yeah, and I mean the culture. I mean, I think I don't know if I mentioned to you last time we met that one of the tradition we have in Madagascar, which would be very shocking to people from the Western world, is we've got that tradition that 5 years after the person passed away, we recover the body and do a big ceremony, and we wrap the body into a sacred cloth, and then have this big ceremony to rebury. So it's a reburial ceremony. And I know that when I've mentioned that to some people in the Western world, they are very shocked, because why are you digging some corpse from the tomb? But in my country, the idea is that spirit has not passed on if you don't do that ceremony. So it's part of the process of what the spirit goes through to get to the next life they need to go to. And there is, it's a tradition that is, I don't know, it's part of a normal everyday life, I suppose, there, but I guess for a Western person, it could be quite shocking.
Yeah.
Different. And that's why I think spirituality is so prevalent in everyday's life in this country, because it comes like birth is around spirituality, because you always have rituals around those big moments of your life: birth, weddings, death, and there is always this birth and rebirth is linked. Death and rebirth are linked. It's not one or the other. So your spirit continue into another realm. It's not the end. It's the end of your body, but it's not the end of your spirit. So it isn't very, it's everywhere in everyday life, that spirituality. It's not, I think in the Western world, it's only some part of the population who practice spirituality.
It's the thing for Sunday morning.
And I mean, this is, again, if you look at the history of Madagascar, for example, when the French came in to colonize the country, that's when they tried to stop that part of spirituality. They tried to introduce Catholicism and convert people so they don't practice those traditions anymore. So some people did convert into, the Western religion, for example, mix the two, trying to find a way to mix the two. So it does evolve as well, but I would say it's still a big part of people's everyday life, I think.
Yeah. Wow. Time's flown by. Are there anything else? Is there anything else that you'd like to share that I've not asked you about, Christelle?
No, I mean, it's been a great opportunity to talk about, I love talking about things that we don't always talk about in the adoption space, because I think it's something that it's important. And also, I think for me, as an adoptee from an African culture, I think it is really important we talk about those, because I am sure I'm not the only one who's been cut for the adoption. I've been cut for the traditions and their way of living in the past. So I am sure that there's other adoptees out there who are trying to reconnect with that spirituality and learning more about how they can incorporate that into their everyday life a little bit more.
Yeah. And you've clearly drawn on a whole host of different modalities to overcome the stuff that you've been through. Is there a particular moment or a particular modality that has been, or event that's been powerful?
Yes, I've trained in a modality called Compassion Key, and it's all around self-compassion. And I would say that has helped me a lot. And I still practice it today, because I think, like you say earlier, we tend to be ashamed of our own feelings and emotions. But with that modality, turning it around, so instead of being so hard on yourself, you are practicing self-compassion all the time on yourself. And also a lot of the inner child work. Inner child has been really important for me so I can look back at that young child, at that 10 years old me that left Madagascar, and trying to talk to her and say that, she's safe now and she doesn't have to be afraid anymore. She's not alone. So having that relationship with that child that is still inside me somewhere. has been really important. I think those are the two things that have helped me along my journey a lot.
Yeah.
And of course, like I say, movement has been really, really important.
Oh yeah. So in a sense, then you've a lot of going back to the modalities that would have been bigger in your Madagascan culture have been part of the ones that have.
Yeah, the movement is definitely, that was very much part of what I would do every day. The inner child, I suppose, I don't know if we would do a lot of inner child, but we would do a lot more of the ancestors veneration, which is something I'm trying to learn a bit more now. I don't know enough about that practice, and that is something I would like to know more. But yeah, and I think self-compassion is, I think a lot of those community do self-compassion as well, because it takes a village in Africa to do everything, and as part of self-compassion you also look for support from other people, because also that's another struggle for us. We tend to be by our own little space and don't want to seek support from others.
Yeah, and it goes to the safety thing, right? We don't feel safe.
Yes.
And I guess that perhaps that's what was going on for you when you went mute, because it wasn't safe to your dialect. Is that what you call it? The dialect of Madagascar?
Yeah, it's a language. It's a national language, because French is the second language. Yeah.
Okay. Sorry, that was an error. I thought it was
we have French, but it's the administration language.
Yeah. Okay.
But we speak Malagasy as the national language, and then we've got each community tribe will have their own language.
Have their own language too. Yeah.
Yeah.
Fascinating. So, as always, listeners, I'd suggest if this is of interest, take a look at the show notes, and you can connect with Christelle and have a look at her website and stuff like that. Find out what she's up to, because especially this transracial adoptee and coaching transracial adoptees, that's your thing.
Mm-hmm. Yes. And I also have a podcast for Black adult adoptees. So if anyone out there wants to connect with me and want to come on the podcast, you are welcome to connect with me as well.
Yeah. Fantastic. Thanks a lot.
Thank you very much.
See you soon, listeners. Cheers.
Thank
Bye-bye.
you.